pot, pensions, and Pritzker. We talk about it next on CapitolView. Welcome to CapitolView, the weekly program where we talk about state politics, government, and how it might just affect you. Joining me this week on CapitolView is Adrianna Pitrelli, State House reporter for Chicago Daily Law Bulletin. Welcome, Adrianna.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And also Brian Mackey, State House reporter for State House reporter for NPR Illinois.
That is the name of our state, yes. Good to be with you,
And
Bruce.
your name as well. Thanks for joining us. Anywho, lots to talk about here. As we're going to air here, the legislature is debating, the State House, as opposed to the Senate, is talking about minimum wage, a $15 an hour minimum wage coming to Illinois. Smart Money says that it is probably going to pass. And this is coming just ahead of the governor's budget address scheduled for next week on Wednesday. Let's talk about the $15 an hour minimum wage if we can. This has been this is a national sort of issue. Lots of states have talked about it. Lots of cities have talked about it. This has become Governor Pritzker's issue that he wants to get done first. Why? Why this issue as opposed to any other? Any guesses?
I think it's something that's a relatively easy issue for him, despite all the consternation from the business community and Republicans in the past couple of weeks, as this has been sort of rushed through the legislative process. If we take a step back, the standard since FDR's time has been the first 100 days, right? What did you accomplish in the first? Yeah. The Illinois General Assembly's calendar typically does not lend itself to that sort of thing because there's a very established procedure that dates back to the 60s with various deadlines and things usually just kind of come to a head in late May at the end of the session. So this has gotten definitely pushed to the front of the line, jumped a lot of other bills, but it's something that, like I said, I think it's a relatively easy lift. It doesn't ask for a lot of pain from Democratic constituencies, and it gives a lot of things to Democratic constituencies. So from that standpoint, it's an easy win for Governor Pritzker to sort of cash in on what he sees as his mandate. He did win by 15 percentage points, and he doesn't have to anger the unions like he may in the budget address in the budget that he proposes and the contract negotiations that he's going to be engaging in with AFSCME and attempting to control pension costs and things like that. So there are tough decisions ahead, and this seems to be something where he can fulfill a campaign promise pretty quickly and slowly. I mean, we talk about the $15 minimum wage. That will be here in the year 2025 if this legislation passes and is signed into law.
Mr. Pritzker may or may not be with us in 2025.
That is a long time away. It's a gradual increase, $1 beginning in 2020, and then another 75 cents that summer, and then $1 a year after that. So it's a slow ramp up to 15.
Okay, it's a slow ramp up. At the same time, he is, by getting this sort of a minimum wage, he's causing other budget problems perhaps elsewhere because there are several folks who work for state government whose payrolls, whose salaries come from the government, who would get a fairly substantial increase if this comes to pass. Does this complicate matters for himself at all? I mean, or is this something where, I can end run this is going to be something that I'm kicking down the can for future folks to deal with?
No, it definitely could, and it was something that was brought up in the House debate that would have happened as we're taping this right now, just right before I got here. People were kind of asking, this isn't just going to impact the small businesses, it can impact the state, and Republicans were asking, do you have numbers? They, at that time, didn't have specifics to that, but it's something that could impact the state as well.
You think about home health care workers is one area. There are a lot of people who do that for the state. Also, universities, public universities have a lot of people, student employees, working in cafeterias, gymnasiums, libraries, things like that. As well as regular state employees. I would guess that most of them are making higher than that rate, who are sort of full-time, non-contract, sort of special program workers. But there will be a financial effect on this down the line, and we don't know what that is yet.
Fair enough. I mean, Republicans have had any real say in this at all. We've seen debates about, well, maybe we should regionalize this, that $15 an hour might be great for Chicago, not so great for the Cairos and the Springfields of the world. Has that had any impact at all whatsoever? Or is this just, we're listening to you, but not really listening to you?
Yeah, I think it was one of the business lobbyists who said there's a difference between being listened to and being heard. And the regionalism is something that the governor views as a non-starter. I mean, and he will say, he campaigned in Carbondale on the $15 wage as well as Chicago, and so he wants to deliver that to the whole state. One thing the Democrats do point to as a compromise they made is this idea, I can't remember the exact phrasing, but it's a tip contribution. So if you work in the restaurant industry, they're allowed to pay you 60% of the minimum wage, and then if you don't make enough in tips to get up to whatever the actual wage is, then they have to kick in some extra money. But most restaurant workers over the course of a shift can make up hopefully $2, $3, $4 in tips, whatever it is, to get up to that threshold. So that's something the Democrats were going to eliminate potentially, and so restaurants would have to pay the full minimum wage, but they agreed to not do that and leave in the existing sort of set of rules that lets restaurants pay less and use tips to make up the difference.
Sure, and that was actually an issue, as I recall, in Washington State when they had upped their minimum wage. And some of the folks who were against that actually were restaurant workers, the bartenders, the wait staffs, that feared that if we raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour or whatever it was in Washington State, then that's going to affect our tips because folks believe, you're making enough, I don't have to leave the 15%, 20% anymore. Brian, you raised something I think is interesting, which was AFSCME negotiations. The governor has said, I am going to deliver a balanced budget proposal. Doesn't mean that that's what's going to be passed, but that's what he's promised. How might AFSCME negotiations figure into this? Because he hasn't been able to make a signed, sealed, delivered deal with the unions at this point in time. Is that something we should be looking at or thinking about?
The Governor Rauner included in most of his, I don't want to say every budget, but most of his budget proposals, this idea of $500 million in savings from the state employee health insurance program, which he would negotiate with the unions. The Governor Rauner talked about, they have these Cadillac or gold, platinum health plans, and we want to take them down to silver or bronze level and make them
Cadillac's
pay more.
plated with platinum, sort of.
Right, exactly. And I should add, as a NPR Illinois is part of the University of Illinois system, and therefore I am a employee of a state university, and I'm part of the state
and
healthcare
very
plans.
Healthy.
Thank you very much. Even though I'm not in AFSCME, I would, that what they negotiate would kind of control for the whole healthcare contract. So that disclosure out there. This is something that a lot of people, we've seen the business groups, the Civic Federation, as well as Susana Mendoza, the Democratic controller of Illinois, saying, please don't include these kind of questionable things, these gimmicks in the budget. Savings from, doing some magical contract negotiations or health insurance changes, things like selling the Thompson Center. I've said this in other venues, but there's an S&P analyst who got a laugh at a presentation earlier this year by saying, the state has included the Thompson Center sale in its budget so many years now that it's no longer a one-time revenue source. It's kind of become a recurring source of revenue for the state.
Yeah.
Obviously,
which is absolutely a gimmick,
Yeah, it's a total, because we have not sold that. We have not. It's one of those things that you put down on paper. Like if you're doing your household budget and say, okay, my employer is going to pay me this much, and I'll work this second job and get this much, and then I'll win the lottery. And so therefore my budget is balanced for the year.
Well, speaking of gimmicks, I don't really want to call this a gimmick, but Deputy Governor, I don't know if that's his proper job title, Dan Hines, today gave a presentation to the Citizens Club in Chicago talking about how to fix pensions. Here's our plan for doing it. And he talked about the fair tax proposal, which rhymes with progressive tax, as if it was a done deal. He didn't say if, he said when. How much of all of this is predicated on a progressive tax being passed and coming to life in Illinois?
I mean,
Go ahead.
the progressive tax is something that could definitely be happening, but it was one of Pritzker's big plans, and I think that's why people are kind of saying when it happens, it's going to happen. But it's not even possible for it to happen for another year and a half or so.
Well, Heinz today said it's possible within 2 years, which
right. I mean, it's a lofty goal. They haven't really started talking about it yet. I think they've been super focused on minimum wage, but they don't have to have what they'll put on the ballot finalized until May of next year even. So I think they're kind of focusing on getting as much done that they can get done that are other goals of Pritzker's, and then they'll start jumping into this. But yes, it's definitely been thrown around as this is definitely going to happen. This is what Illinois is going to start focusing and implementing on.
Well, speaking of easy lifts, this is going to happen so we don't have to think about it, at least on some level. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying, my thinking on this is evolving a little bit, right?
Okay.
And I'm not quite sure where to land yet, because on the one hand, consistent polling has shown the popularity of a graduated income tax or progressive income tax.
Right.
And maybe do we need to explain that this is where it's like your federal taxes for the first, and these are just hypothetical numbers, for the first $20,000 you earn, it's taxed at one level, then the rate goes up for the next $20,000, and then over $100,000, it's a little bit higher level. So that's where the graduated part comes from.
The richer you are, the more you pay.
Exactly, on higher levels of income. And so what polling has shown is that this is a fairly overwhelmingly popular idea, and it's even somewhat above water among even Republicans and conservatives. The Paul Simon Public Policy Institute polling has shown 55% of, I can't remember if it was Republicans or conservatives, the last time that they published a response on this polling question a couple years ago, favored the wealthy paying a higher tax rate than everyone else. And we certainly saw when there was a so-called millionaires tax on the ballot in 2014, that did very well, and legislators promptly ignored it and did nothing with Governor Rauner. That would have been,
but it brought folks to the polls of the Democrats.
The Democrats,
wanted,
right? Yeah. So that's one way to look at this. On the other hand, this has been a hypothetical issue in Illinois until now, and so once things, these issues that people are not taking that seriously, once Republicans start making a lot of noise about how this is going to be the worst thing and we're going to drive the job creators out of the state and all the things that they tend to say about these issues, then you might see more of a ideological sorting on this, and there will be a lot of money we know, or we think we know, coming in on both sides of this issue. We're going to have a lot of television advertising, and there is a lot of time between now and November of 2020 when this is the earliest time it could go before voters.
But there is something that the state and Pritzker could do right now, by the end of the session, that the Civic Federation has brought up, and other government groups, including business groups, have said, which is tax retirement income. That just came out recently in the last week or so. Both business interests and the Civic Federation have said, do it. And we've seen the studies that say that doesn't mean that we tax grandma and grandpa to the nth degree. We exempt the first $50,000 and then start doing it. Any chance for that? And if not, why not? Because this is something that wouldn't require a constitutional amendment. Pritzker and his Democratic allies in the General Assembly could do that now.
Yeah, I mean, Pritzker supports legalizing and taxing marijuana and sports gambling. He's not anti-tax. All of Illinois' neighboring states already have implemented this, so it wouldn't be something that we would be setting a precedent for, per se. And so it definitely could be something that I could see him supporting.
Well, does he have the political courage to do it? Because older folks vote, and he knows that. Everybody knows that. The AARP in previous suggestions had said, nope, this is horrible. It would drive folks out of their homes without, I think, perhaps parsing the details out, particularly exempting the first $50,000. If this is off the table, is the governor, as well as other sorts of things such as taxing services. These are things that they could do right now to get us out of our bind. Why aren't they doing it, and should we hold them accountable? And if so, in what ways? Are they taking the easy way out and saying we're kicking the can to an election in 2020 to do a progressive tax?
I mean, one of the reasons I don't think the governor is going to support this is I believe he was asked about it during the campaign, and did not warm to the idea. I'll put it that way.
Nor did his opponent.
Yeah, nobody, very few people who are in politics, as you said, people who are older vote. I think it's worth thinking, though, about this retirement tax exclusion and what it means. And if you think through, and you're worried about older people who don't have much money, right, who are lower income.
Sure.
Okay, if you are older and you have to work as a greeter at a big box store,
We're not saying Walmart.
Well, I guess we are now. If you have to, take a job as a Walmart greeter, or my Aunt Dami, R.I.P., who into her at least 70s, if not older, was carrying a banquet tray around a Chicago banquet facility, you are paying Illinois income tax on that income.
Right.
So old people who work and
Absolutely have to pay.
they have to pay the tax. And so it's only this money that is never been taxed, really, because it's
Pensions,
it's something
IRAs,
that's gone into your pension or gone into your individual retirement account or 401k, and it's not taxed then. And as you are drawing it out, you're paying federal tax. You are not paying state
Right.
tax in Illinois. So if you think of it from a equity perspective, the idea that people who are, they work for it. Yes, they earned it in the past,
Right.
but they were never taxed on it then, and they're
Right.
not being taxed on it now. Versus people who, don't even have perhaps the luxury or didn't have the prudence to save for retirement and have to work now, they are still being taxed. And so you could imagine restructuring this whole thing where you say, okay, anyone over the age of 65 gets some sort of tax break for, less than $50,000 or something like that. But that's not a discussion. It's something that, it's one of these things that the good government groups like the Civic Federation and the Commercial Club, I get their name mixed up, but these kind of business, fiscal, conservative groups propose year after year. We've heard it before, and there are very few politicians who seem to want to take them up on that sort of thing.
Fair enough. Dan Hines, the former comptroller, now deputy governor, again today made a presentation as we're taping about he wants to, here's how we're going to address the pension issue. One, consolidation of downstate police and fire pensions. That's not on the state government's dime, so to speak, but still is perhaps worthy of consideration. The other thing he talked about was let's borrow some money. Let's float a $2 billion bond to pay some costs. The applause that I heard was somewhat tepid. How is that going to fly? I mean, because we've heard these sorts of things before. We'll borrow the money to pay the pension costs, and it'll work out because we'll free up money for other sorts of things. Is this something that folks have stomach for in the General Assembly? How's that going to go over?
I mean, this is one of the sort of liberal argument for changing the state pension systems and trying to bend the cost curve on state pensions is this idea of crowding out. That, you have this much money to spend on state stuff, and as the more you put into pensions every year, that leaves you less for schools and other things that, the government priorities, healthcare and things like that. And we've seen this as a very clear example with higher education. We talk about how higher ed hasn't seen a budget increase in decades. Really, since 2002, it's essentially flat in terms of the money for operations. But the amount that's gone into pensions for higher ed has gone up and up. Full disclosure again, I'm a member of the State University Retirement System by virtue of my employment at the University of Illinois. But so this is something where the state is putting money into higher education. It's just not putting that money into operations. A lot of it has gone into pensions. So you have to, based on what the Illinois courts have ruled, if you assume you have to make good on all the promises that have been made, all the obligations that have been incurred.
And that's been made abundantly clear. The state Supreme Court has said
multiple cases.
Cases.
Then you have to figure something else out. One of the other ideas Pritzker and Hines have talked about are extending the ramp, as it's called.
Right.
re-amortizing the debt. It's kinda like if you have
by 7 years.
yeah, it's like if you have a mortgage on your house and you have, some kind of we have this weird inflated, the payments get bigger and bigger every year. It'd be kind of like refinancing your house.
I'll press the reset button and change the terms.
Exactly. Which, if, the problem with that is that you're supposed to have money being invested in these pension funds that grows and grows based on the investments, and if you reduce the amount of money that's in there, you get less investment growth over time. And what we saw with the last ramp is that combined with the failure to properly contribute the state's share into the pensions in the aughts, and then the Great Recession came. It was just a series of hits to the finances. So this is something that could have a lot of negative consequences down the road.
I guess what I'm hearing, or based on what I've heard so far, is that trust the progressive tax that will, and that's their version of it, come about, versus not a done deal, which some folks might come about, to kind of bail us out. And these other things seem to be rehashes of what we've heard before, which is do a pension bond, re-amortize the debt.
They're rehashes, but I think it's a little different now in that you do have, for a long time, at least under the Rauner years and even under Governor Pat Quinn, you did not have an acknowledgement of the sort of ironcladness of the state constitution. And it was still like, how can we get around that? Can we declare an emergency? Can we cut the benefits somehow? There is still, the Civic Federation argued, change the Constitution to end that pension protection clause, which maybe that would only be prospective. I'm not sure how much that gains because people who have been hired since 2011 already have significantly lower benefits than
they've tiered it.
Previous state workers.
They've tiered it.
But I do think there is a difference now in that it's sort of this. How can we deal with what the Supreme Court says the Constitution means? Without having to, not working on understand? Not working on the diminishment or the cost bending side, but just working on how do we, do some financial engineering to try and make this soften the blow of this over the coming decades.
Well, let's go on to perhaps a cheerier or less cheery subject, if we could, which is legalization of recreational marijuana. Some folks like it, some folks don't. What I'm wondering about here is, I think we're starting to see some sort of things that I think most folks would have thought predictable, which is the medical marijuana folks have put a substantial amount of money into developing these cultivation centers, and they haven't necessarily got their investments back. What's the legislature going to do on this one? What should they do? Because if we have folks that have put up hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to grow marijuana, should their investment be secured or not? Is that on folks' mind? Should it be?
I think it's definitely something they're talking about, and allowing those organizations or those groups to kind of lead the way, but possibly still let these everyday people have access to grow it, but at like a smaller
5 plants.
So
is what
4 or 5
Maybe.
plants per household,
Maybe.
not even per person. So that way I can't hypothetically grow it and then sell it to Brian and then put these organizations out of business. So I think it's one of those things where I think they definitely know that they want to legalize it recreationally, but it's working out the kinks, looking at what other states are doing. Some states have done the 4 plants per household, some have done no growth whatsoever. I know some of this is also in Canada, so Canada and the United States.
And Canada's out of pot. They
Different
can't.
rules
There's a shortage, but go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that's just the biggest thing, but it's something. There was a town hall event a few weeks ago that they had touched base or talked about just what the best plan of action is on that.
Go ahead.
Well, and I think one of the complicating factors with allowing the medical marijuana investors, some of whom have long histories of owning state buildings and contracting with state government, or are fairly well connected.
Not that they're insiders.
Individuals, yeah, it's insider, right? Okay, well, they are insider. You have a number of Democrats, including this, one of the lead sponsors of this, State Representative Kelly Cassidy. On Thursday, she and other members of a new progressive caucus in the Illinois House were talking about how they are approaching the cannabis legalization from a social justice standpoint. It's something that they want Illinois to lead and get right, in their words, is this idea of people who have been, again, in their words, over-policed on this issue, and communities that have been negatively affected by the strict enforcement of drug laws, the war on drugs.
But hold on for just a
They want them
second.
to have a role in the business side of this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And let's be clear, marijuana has been essentially decriminalized, but I mean, your point is well
Right.
taken. Yeah.
Right, and so right, it is. But even decriminalized, you could still be paying a city fine or something like that,
Sure.
which is not nothing
Right.
for a lot of people.
But can you make a profit? Can you?
Well, and that's the idea here is can, will this be done? And Governor Pritzker has talked about not only legalizing it, but legalizing it in what he calls an inclusive manner. Economic inclusion is the phrase he's used for this.
Okay.
So that is a formula that people are still trying to figure out.
Why then isn't the governor out front on this issue? I mean, it seems like, okay, minimum wage, we're full speed ahead. Legalization of recreational marijuana, I'm for it, but where are the details? He's letting that kind of go asunder. What explains that?
I mean, I think minimum wage is something that he knew he had support on, and he knew it was going to pass. It passed in 2017, just wasn't signed by former Governor Bruce Rushton. And also, I think it was something he definitely wanted to have done prior to next Wednesday, which is when he's giving his budget address. And so I think that he just wanted to go ahead and get that done, since he knew it was going to be able to take a more fast track.
Okay. What about the prospect? And this wasn't, I mean, and we're running out of time here, so we're going to have to do this quickly. Governor Rauner at one point had said, here's the way you do it when it came to medical marijuana. Make sure that everybody passes muster in terms of you don't have criminal backgrounds, you're not with the mafia, you've got substantial capitalization, and then let the free market decide. And again, we're running out of time, but does that have any sort of chance of passing where you say, you know what, let's let capitalism rule, put an excise tax on it, and may the better person win?
I think with just about everything that you would consider like a sin, right, is the sin tax, right? Gambling, liquor, cigarettes are an exception. But the state has kind of created a cartel system where, or an oligopoly, whatever you want to call it, a limited number of players, highly regulated. And I think that that's a model they'll be trying to use for cannabis.
Okay. Well, hey, great thoughts, everybody. Enjoyed the time. And we're out of time. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week on Capitol View.